In the mid-14th century, individuals retired for the night in good health only to awaken on the brink of death. Fever struck swiftly and without warning, accompanied by ominous dark swellings that manifested under the arms and along the neck. Within a matter of days, sometimes mere hours, entire families succumbed. The incessant ringing of church bells became so commonplace that cities ceased tracking the mounting death toll. Graveyards became overwhelmed, streets eerily silent. Across Europe, a chilling question reverberated. Was this truly the end of the world? Unbeknownst to the people of the time, they were living through the deadliest pandemic in recorded human history. One that would claim the lives of up to half of Europe's population and indelibly transform civilization itself. This was the Black Death, and once unleashed, there was no escape from its grasp. To truly grasp the magnitude of the devastation that followed, we must first understand the heights from which humanity plummeted. The early 14th century was not a period of darkness and stagnation, as it is often portrayed. Rather, it represented the zenith of the High Middle Ages, an era characterized by remarkable stability, a population boom, and a degree of interconnectedness not witnessed in Europe since the Roman Empire. Thanks to a favorable climatic period known as the medieval warm period, harvests had been plentiful for generations, leading to a near doubling of Europe's population in just 2 centuries. Cities swelled beyond their ancient Roman walls. Paris, Florence, Venice, and London thrived as vibrant, bustling, and densely populated hubs of human activity. Crucially, the world was becoming increasingly interconnected. A merchant in Venice could acquire silks that had traversed the entire length of Asia, all without ever leaving the trade network secured by the Mongol Empire, the Pax Mongolica. This vast network, a medieval precursor to the World Wide Web, facilitated the movement of spices, gold, ideas, and technology across continents with unprecedented speed. It was a glorious, bustling, and optimistic world. No one sensed danger. Life had never felt safer, fuller, or more connected. However, this interconnectedness proved to be a double-edged sword. The very same caravans and ships that brought wealth were poised to deliver the greatest catastrophe in human history. The infrastructure for global disaster was perfectly in place. This society, seemingly so robust, was about to confront an unseen and incomprehensible enemy it was utterly ill-equipped to combat. The origins of this apocalypse lay thousands of miles away from the stone streets of Paris, in the vast, windswept steppes of Central Asia, most likely in the region of modern-day Kyrgyzstan or northern China. This landscape of extremes is defined by endless horizons of grassland, harsh winters, and scorching summers. Here, an ancient biological agent had lurked for millennia, Yersinia pestis. This bacterium, known for its ruthless efficiency, is endemic to the burrowing rodent populations of the steppes, marmots, and ground squirrels. For centuries, the bacterium existed in a relatively stable ecological balance with its hosts, far removed from major human population centers. However, in the 1330s, this delicate balance of the steppes was disrupted. Climate historians point to a period of ecological stress, possibly a severe drought, followed by torrential rains that decimated the rodent population's food sources. Driven by hunger, the infected rodents migrated closer to human settlements, bringing their fleas along with them. The jump from animal to human occurred in the trading outposts along the Silk Road. The first human victims likely remained ignorant of what was unfolding. They developed high fevers, vomiting, and the terrifying, painful swellings in their lymph nodes, the buboes that lent the disease its name. News in the ancient world traveled slowly, but rumors of disaster spread even faster than merchant caravans. By the early 1340s, terrifying, fragmented reports began to reach Mediterranean ports. Merchants spoke of entire civilizations in the east vanishing, of reigns of fire and pestilence that left India, Tartary, and Mesopotamia utterly depopulated. Lacking any understanding of germ theory, they failed to recognize that the spices flavoring their food were traveling the same route as their eventual executioner. The plague was no longer a rumor. It had reached the edge of Europe. The Crimean Peninsula, jutting into the northern Black Sea, represents the geographical pivot point of this history. Here lay the magnificent city of Kaffa. Kaffa was not merely a town. It was a fortified, immensely wealthy colony of the Republic of Genoa. It served as the crucial link connecting the overland Asian routes to the maritime Mediterranean networks. Within its imposing stone walls lived Italian merchants, Armenian traders, and a cosmopolitan mix of peoples, all under the protection of Genoese crossbowmen. In 1346, Kaffa found itself under siege. The formidable army of the Golden Horde, a successor state of the Mongol Empire led by Khan Jani Beg, surrounded the city. The Genoese, renowned for their defensive capabilities and maritime resupply prowess, prolonged the siege for months in a brutal stalemate. However, a silent killer began to infiltrate the Mongol camps. The besieging army, living in close quarters with poor sanitation, became the ideal breeding ground for the bacterium that had accompanied them from the east. Soldiers began to die by the hundreds, then thousands, their bodies turning dark with gangrene before succumbing. The Mongol army was disintegrating not from enemy action, but from biological warfare. Witnessing his army's collapse and facing defeat, Jani Beg made a horrific decision that would irrevocably alter the course of history. In a desperate and calculated act of psychological and biological warfare, he ordered the corpses of his plague-ridden soldiers to be loaded onto trebuchets. For days, the sky over Kaffa rained dead bodies. The Genoese defenders watched in horror as the pestilent corpses crashed onto roofs and into market squares. The psychological terror was immense, but the biological impact was immediate. The bacteria, carried by the fluids of the corpses and the fleas abandoning their cold hosts for warm, living ones, infiltrated the city. The seemingly impenetrable fortress had been breached from within. Panic seized Kaffa. The wealthy Genoese merchants, realizing the city's impending doom, turned to their greatest asset: their ships. 12 Genoese galleys, laden with refugees, cargo, and unseen stowaways, slipped out of the harbor, fleeing past the dying Mongol army towards the safety of their homeland. They sailed through the Bosphorus, past Constantinople, which would soon suffer its own devastation, and into the open Mediterranean. This sea served as the economic engine of Europe, a zone of intense and rapid trade. Tragically, the fleeing ships became vectors of death, docking at major hubs to resupply, and unknowingly seeding the infection at every stop. The first major European port to fall was Messina in Sicily. When the Genoese galleys arrived, the dockworkers who rowed out to meet them were met with a scene straight out of hell. Contemporary chroniclers report that most of the sailors were dead, their bodies rotting on deck. The few survivors were delirious, racked with pain, and covered in black boils, dripping blood and pus. The port authorities of Messina realized the nature of the cargo far too late. They ordered the ships expelled. But the true agents of transmission, the black rats ubiquitous on medieval ships, and the fleas on their backs, had already used the mooring ropes to scurry onto the docks. Messina became the test case for Europe, and it failed miserably. The speed of the infection proved paralyzing. The close-quartered living conditions of a medieval port city acted as an accelerant. Within weeks, the social fabric of Messina disintegrated. People fled the city for the countryside, inadvertently spreading the contagion further across the island. News of the Great Pestilence spread rapidly, and other ports attempted to close their harbors to ships arriving from the east. However, medieval quarantine measures were easily circumvented. Greed often trumped caution. A ship laden with valuable spices could frequently bribe its way into port. By early 1348, the great maritime republics were crumbling. Genoa, the home port of the ships from Caffa, was devastated. Venice, the queen of the Adriatic, faced an existential threat. The Venetians, ever the pragmatic merchants, eventually developed the concept of the Lazaretto Islands in the lagoon, designated as quarantine zones, where arriving ships and crews had to wait 40 days, 40 giorni, before being allowed to enter the city. It was a pioneering public health measure, but for the initial wave of the plague, it proved too little, too late. The gondolas of Venice transformed into funeral barges, piling bodies high as they navigated the now silent canals. From the Italian ports, the disease spread westward to Marseille, the great gateway to France, and across the Adriatic to Dubrovnik. The coastal perimeter of Europe had been breached. Now, the disease turned inland as the plague moved away from the coasts, following river barges along the Rhone and carts along Roman roads. It encountered the densely populated heart of medieval Europe. Cities such as Paris, Florence, London, and Barcelona were walled enclosures of winding, narrow alleys, multi-story timber houses that blocked out the sunlight, and open sewers running down the center of the streets. They were incredibly vibrant and wealthy places, but from a hygienic standpoint, they were tinderboxes, just waiting for a spark. When the plague struck a major metropolis, it didn't merely kill people, it killed the city itself as a functioning organism. We must strive to understand the sheer terror of facing this scourge without the benefit of modern science. The brightest minds of the 14th century, the doctors of the University of Paris, were utterly baffled. Their framework was not germ theory, but the ancient Greek theory of humors and miasma. Doctors advised people to avoid bathing, as it would open their pores to the corrupted air. They burned aromatic woods like juniper and rosemary in street corners in an attempt to combat the smell of death. They bled patients already weakened by the disease. They lanced the buboes, which only served to spread the septicemic infection even faster. Every rational attempt to stop the disease only seemed to exacerbate it. The realization that their best knowledge was utterly useless created a profound psychological crisis. The Italian writer Giovanni Boccaccio, who personally witnessed the devastation of Florence, a city that lost perhaps 60% of its population, left behind chilling accounts of the social collapse. The fear of contagion became so overwhelming that the most sacred bonds of humanity were severed. Boccaccio wrote of fathers abandoning sons, wives leaving husbands to die alone in their beds. The sick were walled up inside their homes. The intricate machinery of medieval life ground to a halt. Laws were ignored because there were no magistrates left to enforce them. Courts closed. Bakeries ceased baking. The sounds of a bustling city, carts, shouting merchants, construction were replaced by a heavy, oppressive silence, broken only by the constant tolling of church bells until the ringers themselves perished or authorities banned the bells to stop the spread of panic. The dead piled up faster than they could be buried. The consecrated ground of churchyards became overcrowded, leading to the digging of massive plague pits, trenches where bodies were stacked like cordwood, layer upon layer, covered with a thin dusting of soil. In the 14th century, there was no clear distinction between the physical world and the spiritual world. An event of this magnitude could only be interpreted as direct divine chastisement, God punishing humanity for its manifold sins of greed, pride, and corruption. The Church, the bedrock of medieval life, faced an impossible test. People flocked to cathedrals, praying for deliverance, massing together in processions that only served to accelerate the spread of the respiratory, pneumonic form of the plague. When prayers went unanswered, and priests died just as quickly as sinners, a desperate and radical piety emerged. The flagellant movement swept across northern Europe. Bands of hundreds of men, dressed in identical robes, marched from town to town. They were a terrifying sight. bringing religious hysteria wherever they went. Faith had not failed. It had simply lost control. But as the death toll mounted, the need for a tangible scapegoat grew ever darker. If God was not listening, perhaps the devil was at work. A horrific conspiracy theory took root, particularly in the Holy Roman Empire and parts of Spain, that Jewish communities were deliberately poisoning the wells of Christendom in order to wipe out the faithful. Despite official condemnations of these theories by Pope Clement VI, who pointed out that Jews were dying of the plague just as quickly as Christians, the mob mentality took hold. Fueled by centuries of anti-Semitism and the desperate need to blame someone, horrific pogroms erupted. Entire communities in cities like Strasbourg, Mainz, and Cologne were rounded up and burned alive in wooden houses or town squares. The Black Death unleashed not just biological horror, but the darkest aspects of human nature. It is a mistake to perceive the plague as purely an urban phenomenon, while cities were undeniably the epicenters. 90% of medieval Europe's population resided in the countryside. The plague traveled there too, carried by refugees fleeing the cities or itinerant peddlers. The devastation in rural areas unfolded more slowly, but perhaps exerted a more profound long-term impact. Thousands of small villages, whose names are now lost to history, were completely eradicated. The manorial system, which depended on a consistent supply of peasant labor to cultivate the Lord's land, ground to a complete halt. Contemporary chronicles depict eerie rural scenes. Harvests rotting in the fields with no one to gather them. Herds of sheep and cows wandering aimlessly through the landscape, eventually turning feral or dying of neglect because all the shepherds had succumbed. The carefully managed medieval landscape was gradually being reclaimed by the wilderness. By 1350, the plague had reached the northernmost limits of the continent, Scotland, Scandinavia, and even the small settlements of Greenland, delivering a death blow to the Norse colonies there. It had raged through the entire continent, from the warm Mediterranean to the frozen north. By 1351, the initial, catastrophic wave of the Black Death began to burn itself out. The bacterium had simply exhausted its supply of easily accessible victims. The fog began to lift, revealing a continent utterly transformed. The exact death toll will forever remain unknown, but modern historians estimate that between 75 and 200 million people perished across Eurasia and North Africa. In Europe alone, perhaps 50% of the population was wiped out in less than 5 years. The survivors emerged into a world that appeared the same on the surface, but was fundamentally different underneath. The immediate aftermath was marked by economic chaos and severe inflation. But then something remarkable occurred. The massive depopulation led to a critical labor shortage. For the first time in centuries, the peasant class held the power. Lords, desperate to have their land cultivated, were compelled to offer higher wages and improved working conditions. The rigid structures of serfdom began to crumble and, in many regions, eventually collapsed altogether. The golden age of the laborer had begun, born from the ashes of unimaginable devastation. The psychological scars ran deep. Art became preoccupied with death. The danse macabre, the dance of death, became a popular motif, depicting skeletons leading kings, popes, and peasants alike to the grave. A stark reminder that death was the ultimate equalizer. The Black Death represented the greatest trauma that Western civilization had ever endured. It shattered the optimism of the High Middle Ages and exposed the fragility of human systems when confronted by the power of nature. The society that slowly rebuilt itself was more cynical, more questioning, and compelled to adapt. Ultimately, the path of death that we have traced today cleared the ground for the slow, painful emergence of the modern world. For centuries, the Black Death has been relegated to the realm of a distant medieval nightmare. But empty streets, locked homes, fear of the very air we breathe, does that really sound like ancient history? Or does it feel uncomfortably familiar? The plague was a test of civilization, and tests have a way of repeating themselves. Anyway, I'm Tom, watching the past so we can understand the present, and together, we keep history reborn. I'll see you in the next era.